Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 2. I'll read it for you. And it came about in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." So the king is asking Nehemiah, who is his cupbearer. You know, Nehemiah's job was a cupbearer. And he says, "Why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." And an interesting thing about the character Nehemiah in the Bible, and he is an unlikely hero in the Bible. I mean, hero in the sense there's a book named after him. You know, that makes you a hero for sure, if it is in the book called the Bible. But normally, if you really study the Bible, the heroes of the Bible are mainly can be in one of the three categories. If you want to be a hero in the Bible, you normally have to be a king, right? Like David was a hero, right? And Solomon was a hero, and they were kings. Or you have to be a priest. Aaron was a priest. Ezra was a priest, right? He's a priest. And so you are a king or a priest or a prophet, right? Like you have to be a prophet. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all those prophets, even Moses considered a prophet. So, but when you try to look at Nehemiah, he is not a priest, he is not a prophet, and he is not a king. And if you really ask me what he was doing, like I said, he was a cupbearer. Now that's kind of a job which doesn't exist anymore. So if you contextualize it, a cupbearer is essentially like a waiter, like a table waiter when you go to a restaurant. You know, the person who comes and cleans your table and pours coffee when you finish, right? Give you water. And that's probably the closest person we can find as a cupbearer. So he was essentially a waiter. That's who he was, right? But yet he became this hero, and in whose name a book is written. So Nehemiah's character arc, or the character, how it is developing, is very interesting. Now again, we know, and particularly as we live in the Western world, I mean, if you say you're a waiter in India or elsewhere, they immediately have a stigma attached to it. Oh, you're a waiter. But you know, when you go to a restaurant here, you have no idea who is going to wait on you at your table. And I still remember when I came to the U.S. for the first time, that was around 18 years ago, one of my friends who took me out for the next day, we went out to a restaurant for lunch. And so we went there, and we had a nice lunch, and I don't remember, $20 or something. And then my friend said, "Let's give a good tip," because generally people here think that the Indian people are so cheap, and they don't give a lot of tips. So we have to change that image. So we have to give a good tip. I still remember. So 18 years ago, back in the days in India, the concept of tip itself was new. And then I said, really? After $20 was too much. Now we had to give a tip. So I was thinking maybe we'll give $2. But he said, no, let's give $5. So it was a young white girl who was waiting on our table. So we gave a $5 tip and felt very proud of myself for changing the image of Indians and being a very generous in my tipping. And my friend and I, we went outside and we were talking in the parking lot. There was a very brand new, shiny BMW parked there. So we were kind of looking at, man, like this is the kind of car we should buy 18 years from now, which hasn't happened yet. But we were just appreciating that car and just thinking about it. Then suddenly this waitress who was waiting on us came out. Her shift is over, her uniform is out, and she's dressed like a model now. And she said, "Excuse me, sir, can I get into my car?" And then, oh, this is your car? So this young girl, then we ended up, we struck a conversation with her, and she said she is studying to become a doctor. And she was an MD student in a university nearby, Notre Dame University, I think. This is in Indiana, by the way. And then it was such a shock for me to realize that the person I thought of as a waitress in India, I would have put her in a particular class, and that's where we are coming from. Now she is driving this BMW, and the person that I thought I was, being generous to her, we ducked into our 25-year-old Honda Civic. We kind of drove away. And so that was a rude awakening. Rude awakening of the realities of being a waitress or a waiter here in the Western world. Right? So Nehemiah was kind of like that. We thought, when we opened the book, we think Nehemiah was a waiter. And he was. But when the book ends, when we come to the end of the book of Nehemiah, he's not a waiter anymore. He is a governor. He's a governor. He's a politician. He's a builder. He's a contractor. He's a fighter. And he's a warrior. And he is all those things which we didn't realize that he was. Because when we read the book of Nehemiah chapter 2 verse 1, he is just a cupbearer, a waiter standing by the king. Now again, we have to realize in that particular context, being a waiter is not a small thing, okay? I'll tell you why. Because back in the days, when you are a king, there are a lot of people who are going to be after your throne, right? The generals are trying to organize a coup to take your position to your throne from you, or even your wife and your daughters or king or sons. You cannot trust anybody when you are a king, because everybody is after your life, everybody is after your position. Now, back in the days, there are no bombs. Like if you want to assassinate a king, there are many politicians assassinated around us, and we can see that they have high-level security, right? So back in the days, there are no bombs. And today, assassination can be very easy because of mass destruction and the technology has developed. But back in the days, to kill a king, it's not that easy to go and fight a king because he walks around with all this security around him. So the easiest way to kill a king back in the days is to do it by poisoning the king. Somehow get access to the kitchen and put a drop of poison in his cup or in his food so that he can be killed easily. Does that make sense? So to be a waiter, to be a cupbearer of a king means you need a high level of security clearance. It's not a job you can walk into. I have a friend's daughter who got appointment to, she wanted to work for CIA, the spy agency. She got her provisional appointment almost a year ago. She passed all the tests, passed all the interviews, but they still haven't given her her appointment letter because she is going through multiple levels of security clearance to make sure that she can get that job. The reason is it is such a prestigious, not prestigious, you have to have a trustworthy person to be in that position. So when you say Nehemiah was a waiter, it doesn't just mean that it's a job, but he is also a highly, highly trusted person. And the king probably trusted Nehemiah much more than he trusted his wife or his son or his daughters. Because that's the way in which it worked. See, again, back in the days, there was a system of slavery, right? So when there were slaves, and after 7 years, the book of Exodus, when you go home and you can read Exodus chapter 21, there is this whole system of how slavery has to be executed justly, okay? And according to which, if a slave serves the master for around 7 years or 6 years, and the 7th year, he is allowed to go free. Does that make sense? So 6th year, a slave serves the master, and the 7th year, he is allowed to go free. But if a slave comes to the master and says that, "Master, I love you so much, I love the way you treated me, and this has become a family to me. I don't want to leave you. I love you so much. I don't want to ever leave you. Then the master will take the servant or the slave to the doorpost and pierce his ears. It's all in the book of in Exodus chapter 21. So the master will pierce the ear of his slave, and the slave will become a bond slave. That means a slave forever. Because that slave essentially makes a statement that I don't want to leave my master anymore on my own free will. Now, this is not I'm being obliged to him to do something, but on my own, I am going to stick to my master. I am going to be with my master. That's the bond servant or a bond slave. Only a bond slave can be trusted, because everybody else around you have an agenda. They all want something from you when you are a king, right? When you are a king, everybody wants to get something out of you. When you are a celebrity, that's why when you in Los Angeles, you see a lot of celebrities and we think they have all friends, but actually they are the loneliest of all lonely people because they cannot trust anybody. Everybody around you wants something from you. That's the problem when you become a king. That's the problem when you become a leader. Now, as a king, he cannot trust, like I said, your wife or your children, but a bond slave is somebody who can be trusted, because he on his own said that I don't have a life outside this. I don't have a home I need to build. I don't have a wife I need to provide. I don't have to spend money elsewhere. I have no other agenda except to be in the presence of my master. And then you become a bond slave, and then you can be trusted to be the cupbearer of the king. And you need to be a trusted servant. And in Luke chapter 17, Jesus told a parable. And I'm not going to read it again because I preached on this parable a while ago. Essentially, this is the story Jesus said. Jesus said, if you have a servant who is either plowing or tending sheep, when he comes home, will you say to him, please come and eat, but you would rather tell him that get ready, prepare my food, serve me food, then you will also eat. I'm just paraphrasing that story. You remember that parable, right? When you read that parable, when you hear a story like that, the first instinct, I don't know what you thought of, but when I read that story for the first time, and I thought, man, what a cruel master. Is that the way you do it? You have a slave, the poor slave was out in the field all day long, plowing in the field or tending sheep in the meadows, and then he comes back and he wants to have a glass of water, and the master says, no, before you eat, you first serve me, prepare food for me, then you can eat. What a cruel master, right? But when you understand the parable in the context, understand the principle of a bond slave, understand the principle that a master can serve only, then you can look at the story in a very, very, like you said, Sneha, in a very, very different angle. This master can only trust this servant who is out in the field. And the master cannot even have a glass of water. He cannot ask his wife. He cannot ask his children. He cannot trust any other servant. He is waiting all day long for his trusted servant, the bond servant, the servant of the inner court, the servant whose ear is pierced, to come so that only he can be trusted. And then, then only the master can also eat. That's another way to look at this parable. So when you look at that parable from that angle, that story is not about the cruelty of the master, but it is about the loyalty of the servant. Does that make sense? It is not about the cruelty of the master, but it is the loyalty of the slave. A slave who can be trusted with anything, with your life. And that is the kind of person who can be a cupbearer. A cupbearer. Because king's life depends on that. It's not like anything, because that cupbearer has to be important. And king has to have that ultimate, intimate level of trust with the cupbearer. See, none of us, I guess, have lived in the kingly, back in the days, the royals ruled. And we have royal rule in Britain, but it's all just the facade, right? Like, that's not real king's rule. But back in the days when the kings used to rule, there are different levels of relationship you can have with the king. Because if there is a king ruling in our country, we are all subjects of the king, right? In that sense, we have a relationship with the king. So the king will come every week or in his balcony. That's the way the kings used to be. They will appear in the balcony. And they will just wave their hands and address the subjects. And then we, as the subjects, go there and say, Hail King, and the king will wave. And that's the same thing you see in Great Britain, and the prince, the Charles, whoever, the prince and the princesses, and they come to their balcony and they wave, and all the subjects say, Hail King, Hail King. Or Pope, the Catholic Pope, right? He appears in that balcony, and everybody goes and sort of worship or sort of praise him, right? So back in the days, the king appeared on the balcony. If we are subjects, what we have, the relationship with the king is that we have a sense of, I would say, a reverential fear with the king, right? We revere the king. And so we say, Hail King, and the king will, dig his, he'll take a handful of silver coin and then throw it into the crowd, and then the crowd will, they get, how much coin you got? I said, I got 2 coins this week. How much you got? I didn't get anything, but last week I got something. So it was a great blessing for me last week, but this week it was a great blessing for you, but I'm sure next week will be a blessing for all of us. It's almost like us going to the church. That's what we do in the church, right? So we come and we sit in the pew and we say, Hail King, and the king appears here. I'm not talking about the pastor. We see God in the majesty at the pulpit, and the king throws at you some blessings, and you grab, my sickness is gone. I got a new job. I'm happy. I got my silver coin, and then, that's all I want. I don't want any more relationship. We are the subjects of the king. And we just want to worship the king, that's all. And if the king comes back, maybe we'll want to take a selfie with the king or something, but we don't want to get to know the king. All we want to do is not to be in trouble and get in front of the king. Make sure that we pay the taxes or tithe, whichever way you want to call it, in time, and we do a meticulous life, so that we don't want to end up in trouble and be in front of the king and by doing something wrong, right? So as long as we have that relationship with the king, we are normally okay. So that's what we do as subjects of the king, a reverential fear or a reverential attitude towards the king. Now, the king has a court inside, right? The king's court, the back in the days at least, we know this from pictures. So who are in the king's court? All his subjects are in the king's court? No, only the selected people, right? So there are, ministers in the king's court. There are generals in the king's court. There are musicians in the king's court who entertains the king. And there are wise men who advise and counsels. And the very, very, very important people will be invited to the king's court. And these important people have a better relationship with the king than the subjects, right? I believe that kings know them by name, most of them, because only the trusted people can come into the court, right? And they won't just get the silver coin. They will probably get gold coins for their recognition. If the minister gives a very good diplomatic advice, the king will say, okay, I'm going to recognize you for your wisdom. Or the general goes and wins a war, and then I'm going to recognize that general by gold coins and doing something better. And that's a more, I would say, in the king's court, people have a personal friendship with the king, right? It's not like the subjects. It's a better relationship, right? But then again, at the innermost level, at the innermost chamber, there is only the king and his cupbearer. Now, the reason, like I said, not even his wife at the innermost level. The reason is, very interesting, back in the days, there is this custom. If you're a king, and if you have an empty wine glass in front of you, an empty glass in front of you, or even a half-full glass in front of you, it is considered inauspicious. That really means that the king doesn't have anything, or he is not he's not prosperous enough, right? You know, when I grew up back in Kerala, I still remember we used to have rice, you know, for lunch and dinner. We have rice. And at the end of, you know, having this full meal, my father always insisted that we all leave a little bit of rice in the plate. Because that is a symbol that we are from a rich family. That is a symbol that we are aristocratic. That's a symbol that tells the world, it's a customary thing to say the world that we have enough and more, so that we are leaving. Sometimes you're so hungry you want to eat that too. But my father will not let us do that because it's a bad omen to leave, to have an empty plate. You have to always have something little left in that. So this is a customary thing. So that's why even in the book, you know, Nehemiah, when we read, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. So I am in the presence of the king, and the king took a gulp from his wine glass, and it's half empty, and immediately that wine glass has to be filled. Because if there is a half-empty glass, that means that the king is poor. Somebody has to fill it. Keep filling it. So whenever you see the picture of a king in his inner chamber, when he is all alone, he is standing there, and his cupbearer is standing next to him, filling it. As you know, it's just like this unlimited soda drink you buy. Like, you know, just keep filling. That's his job. It is important that the slave or the cupbearer does that, because he has that intimate level of presence in the inner court. And if you watch English movies, and I know not a lot of people watch movies here, but in English movies, a bartender is a character, is an archetype in so many ways. There's a bartender in many movies who becomes like a psychologist, like a therapist for the hero. The hero goes to the bar, and then he sits at the bar counter, and he talks about all these things he cannot share with his wife, or he cannot share with his intimate friend, with this bartender. But the bartender will be serving drink, and while he is listening to. So the bartender is a very classic character put in the script for the character, for the hero to express all his pain, which he cannot otherwise do. Right? So the point I'm trying to make is, in the inner chamber, some people are happy with being subjects and sitting under their balcony and running away with the silver coin. And some people are more ambitious. They go to the king's court and they get gold coin, and they have a personal friendship with the king. But there in the innermost court, when there is only the king and the king alone, only the cupbearer is the one who stands by the king. And the cupbearer doesn't get silver coin. The cupbearer doesn't get gold coin because he has no use of it. He has left his family. He has left his dreams. He has left his ambition. He has no use of this. All he desires is to be in the presence of the king. That is the best reward he hopes for. That's why your ears are pierced. That's why you're not just a slave, you are a bond slave who has nowhere else to go. I'm not happy by being under the balcony. I'm not happy by being in the court of the king, but I want to go to him to the inner chamber. I want to be in the presence of the king. That is the power of the cupbearer. That's the power of being a waiter, having the presence of the king on a continual basis. That is the ultimate level of intimate relationship you can have with the king. So it is a very, very desirable job if your desire is for the king. If your desire is for the silver or gold coin, you're at the wrong profession. And I still remember when I graduated from my engineering college, this was back in 91, there were not so many jobs out there, and now there's globalization, a lot of companies, so we were all panicking towards the last year, and we were applying for jobs here and there and all these companies. And one of our friends who actually had a better grade than I had, and he applied for one job. That was to be a security guard in a jewelry store. And then everybody said, what is wrong with you? You want to be a security guard? I mean, you studied engineering, you got good grade, and, Then eventually we realized that there was this girl he loved. And this girl, he works for the jewelry store. This girl works in the jewelry store, so he thought somehow he wants to get a job. He can see the girl he loved, his beloved, on a or everyday basis. So he thought that would be more appropriate for him to get that job. Unfortunately, he didn't get that because they found him overqualified to be a security guard in a jewelry store. But it taught me a lesson. If you really love that girl to that extent, you don't care what job you get. You don't care how much money you get. All that is in your heart is to see my beloved on an everyday basis. Their presence, that's all I care. And now that is something which is very commendable. And that is the true love. That is the true enjoying and experiencing true presence. If we desire, the only thing we desire is the presence of the Lord in our life, the ministries don't matter. It can be mic operating ministry, or it can be a chair folding ministry. It doesn't have to be a preaching ministry. It doesn't have to be a prophetic ministry or music ministry. If you truly desire the presence of the King, the details don't matter. The fact that everybody will say, oh, look at that. My son, studied and he became a general in the King's court. My son became a minister in the King's court. Look at him. He is still a cupbearer. He's still a waiter. All he does is standing by the King with this cup in his hand. What kind of a job is that? Yeah, that's true from their perspective. But you know that, only you know that what you desire is the presence of the King. There is no place like this if you want to experience the presence of the King. And I can tell you one thing from my own experience, and I've seen in churches, people who have got everything. They have houses, they have cars, and they've got everything they wanted. They achieved everything. But there are so many people in the pews I have met live with some kind of discontentment. There is something they miss. They don't feel the presence of God in their life. It's not that they don't have it, but they don't feel it. Their lives are like hell. They're not happy. They go to church, they do everything, but they are not happy because they don't experience the presence of God. But I have also seen in the same pews, people who have nothing, no job, nothing, no address, no reputation. I mean, sometimes people look at what kind of a person is he, but they're so happy because somehow in a mysterious way, they know they're standing in the inner chamber bearing King's cup. And they enjoy, they feel the presence of God. And because of that, their life is so meaningful. Now, that is the story of the cupbearer. That is the kind of person the Lord wants us to become if we desire that ultimate level of intimacy. Now, what happens when you have that desire or that level of intimacy is what we just read. The book of Nehemiah is a book of action. And all this action unfolds from that particular verse we read. And you know the story, right? The king asked, Nehemiah, why is your face so sad? Then Nehemiah starts explaining, this is a problem. I am here, I am fine, I'm happy to be with you, but I have my people miles away from here. And I have my country miles away from here. The walls of my country is broken. The people are plundered. And they don't have an identity. They have no sense of nationality. My heart actually goes out to them. And then, the king says, why not take some of, the king gives them a group of soldiers and, people who are contractors and all that. And then they go and build the wall and everything that happens. You know the story. But all this happens starting from this particular verse. And interestingly enough, and the way it starts, and I'm going to read it one more time. So the king says this, now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Now, it gave me chills when I read it for the first time. The reason is, here is a king, right? And the king is looking at his cupbearer, and he noticed the change of countenance in his cupbearer, how his face changed. See, if you are a king and one of your subjects had, they lost their house, they lost their family member, they lost their job, the king is not going to know that, right? If I am a king and you are all subjects in my kingdom, If something happens to you, I will tell you, give a formal complaint to my department. If you lost a house, there is a housing department. If you need a job, go to the job department or the human resource department. I am the king, and I don't have time to take care of everybody, and I've created a system. So if you are a subject, you have to go to the formal route of complaint, and then you do it. You may get it, you may not get it. Now, if you are a court official, right, if you are in the court, then the king may notice if there is something visibly changed. For example, if the minister come one day, and he had a gruff voice, and he is coughing, then the minister will say, hey, minister, do you have a cold? Obviously, he looks like he has a cold, right? Or if the general comes, if the general has a big mustache, and one day general decides to come clean shave, and he comes in, and the king might, you shaved your face. I mean, you shaved. Oh, okay, what happened? Because there is a visible change that happened in one of the officials of the court. So the king might notice. But now, when you are a slave in the inner chamber, the king noticed the way your countenance changed. It is not Nehemiah who initiated the conversation. It is the king who started the conversation. The king looked at Nehemiah and said, Nehemiah, what happened? Why is your face so sad? Many times people come to me and say, Pastor Mathew, what is the secret of an answered prayer? How to make sure that my prayers will be answered? We have all the stereotypical answer why your prayers are not answered because of this. But how do I pray? And I want to make sure that my prayer will be answered. How do I make sure of that? I always tell them that, this is a classic example. Let the Lord start your prayer. Okay? What really happens is, the whole action is unfolding. The whole answer of prayer, Nehemiah is getting, of building the wall and restoring his nation, the whole thing started not from Nehemiah. Nehemiah was not even going to mention it. He always carried it, but he didn't want to open it. But the king noticed his countenance. The king noticed his face, and the king started the prayer. It is the king who started saying that, Nehemiah, what happened? Why are you so sad? Isn't it, what kind of a privilege? What is better than that? The king, without you asking, ask you first. Can you imagine, as a Christian, you get up in the morning, you go for the morning prayer, you go and kneel in front of, you kneel by your bed, and before you open your mouth in prayer, the Lord asks, Mathew, what happened? Why is your face so sad? Are you okay? Can you picture that? That's exactly what is happening in Nehemiah. Nehemiah didn't have to pray. Nehemiah didn't have to say any word. Nehemiah didn't have to fast. Nehemiah didn't have to go with a list of things. King notices, because if you look at the face of the king, the king also is looking at your face. Now that is very, very important for us to realize that. That is not a privilege the ministers have. That is not a privilege the generals have, because they are not looking at the face of the king 24/7. Only the cupbearer does that. The cupbearer is the bond slave of the inner court. He is in the presence of the Lord all the time. So he doesn't have to ask for anything. He doesn't have to plead for anything. He doesn't have to argue for anything. All he has to do is just to stand there, and the king will start the prayer. Every day morning. And you look at the Garden of Eden. That is when humanity had the ultimate relationship with God. And God and human beings, God came to walk with them, to take a stroll with the humanity. And how does that start? It says, Adam, where are you? Who starts the prayer? It's not the people. The religion teaches us to ask the question, God, where are you? That's our prayers, right? That's how we pray. God, where are you? Our heavenly, we have flowery words and, more theologically appropriate language. But essentially, our prayers are like that. God, where are you? I am in deep trouble. Can't you see this? But even before that, God comes and says that, Adam, where are you? Nehemiah, why are you so sad? What can I do for you? If God opens a prayer, He knows how to close it. If God starts a prayer, it is going to be finished by God Himself. If God does that prayer, He begins the prayer, that prayer is going to be answered. And that's the only way you can guarantee an answer to a prayer. Let God open your prayer. All you need to do is to stand in the presence of the Lord, desiring to be with Him. That's all your desire. Not for silver coin, not for gold coin. And you come to a stage where you don't have anything to pray because the King knows your heart. He has already initiated the action. All you need to be is to be an instrument, to be a channel of dispensing His grace or His power in this world. And that is the lesson of Nehemiah. I strongly encourage you guys to go home and study the book of Nehemiah. It is amazing the way the lessons for Christianity and being, how Nehemiah will encourage us not just be satisfied being in the pew, or not just be satisfied in the salt committee and being the leader and being helping and volunteering. These are good. That is where we are at the King's Court official. But ultimately, it is all about that personal, intimate relationship with the King and being there as a cupbearer. And I'm going to finish, and I just have to remind you one more thing, and especially this is a Mission Sunday. Since I was talking about a cupbearer, I should read the story of another cupbearer. I'm not going to take much time, just hopefully 5 minutes or so. But this cupbearer, from the book of Genesis. I'll read the book of Genesis 41, verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. I'm going to read that one more time. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Now, you know the story, right? Don't tell me I have to repeat it. This is the cupbearer who had a issue, and he ended up in prison. And Joseph interpreted a dream he had, and there was a chief baker who ended up dying, but the cupbearer ended up getting his life. But when he went from prison, Joseph said, please remember me. When you become the cupbearer, you are going to stand with the king 24/7. And I know you have that intimate relationship with the king. Even the queen doesn't have. I know you have influence. I know you have position. You can do so many things which nobody else can. So can you remember me? And the person didn't. Right? And after a while, then the king had another dream, and then that's when this happens, that the cupbearer says, now I remember my offense. Now, very often we think, the cupbearer, he forgot, and that's often the way we read it, he forgot. I'm telling you, I don't think he forgot. Nobody will forget. When your life is in danger, when you are on the death row, a prophet comes to you and speak to you that you are not going to die. You are going to go back to the palace. You are not going to forget that person, even if you want to forget that person. It is not that he forgot. And that's why he says, I remember my offense. I did commit a crime. Not that I forgot. I did not want to take the risk for this person. That's essentially what he is saying. Because, back in the days, Joseph was arrested for, the Me Too campaign. Today, it's a big thing. This is back in the days, the ultimate level of Me Too, right? Today, we know Joseph was innocent. But if you lived at that time, the Bible was not written. We don't know the story. We wouldn't have believed Joseph too. So probably he thought this guy is arrested for Me Too campaign. So it's a case I don't want to get involved. It's not just the Me Too hashtag campaign. The lady had a proof too. Potiphar's wife had a proof with his DNA on it. So it could have been proven in any court that Joseph was guilty. So the cupbearer thought, he's a nice prophet, but I don't want to get involved in this kind of that case, and this is going to be a mess up, so I don't want to get involved. And that's probably what he thought, and I don't think he forgot, and I'm not going to take that. That's why he said, now I remember my offense. Because God had given the responsibility of this innocent prophet to me, but as a cupbearer, I had the power and influence to help that person, take that person from out of the prison, but I did not do that. God had a master plan. If Joseph didn't come out of the prison, Pharaoh would not have survived, right? Like because of that famine which is going to come. Joseph was prepared to help Egypt in the time of trouble. Now, Egypt was not out of the trouble. The world would not have survived. That's exactly what the book of Genesis says. When there was a famine, all the world came to Egypt because nobody else could kind of feed the whole world. So, God had this master plan for the world which depended on Egypt. And God had this master plan for Egypt which depended on Joseph. And God had this master plan for Joseph which depended on the cupbearer. And he forgot that, or he decided to forget it. And that was a big offense. That was a big offense. Now, Nehemiah, his face was sad, not because he did not have enough money to build a house. Nehemiah's face was sad not because he didn't have a job. Nehemiah's face was sad not because of anything that is personal to him, just because his people were dying outside, just because the walls were broken outside back in Jerusalem. That's why his face was sad, not anything personal. Now that is what we can take away this Mission Sunday. As we cry out to God for our own personal needs and our own jobs and our own things we need, it is all important. I'm not saying that it is not important. But our face will at least it be sad, even if you don't cry out, even if you don't do prayer or fasting. At least can our face be sad thinking about what is happening outside of our little territory, our little personal empires we have created? And that is what makes you a true hero. And that is the power of you as a cupbearer, because you are standing at the presence of the king. And there is a broken wall outside. There is a devastated land outside. There are imprisoned prophets outside. Will your face be sad? Will your face be sad? Maybe you don't have the strength to become a general. Maybe you don't have the intellect to become a minister, but do you have the loyalty to become a cupbearer? That's all you need to become. The loyalty, the bond say, pierce my ears, Lord. Pierce my ears. I have no motivation. I have no hidden agenda. I have nothing to desire outside of you and what you have desired for me. And let my prayers start from you. Let our action be initiated by you. All I want to be in your presence. And let's go to the Lord. Like that, let's close our eyes for a minute. You know, in the Old Testament, as people come, there are a lot of people. There is this outer court. That's where the altar is. That's where the sacrifices are made. That's where all the action is happening, at least for people from outside. Some of us are very happy by being in the outer court. But then the Lord is asking us to be into the inner court, the holy place. Because we are not just worshipers. We are royal priesthood, who are called from darkness to his marvelous light. And we are called to the holy place to minister to him like the priest and the Levites to minister to him. But then again, we shouldn't be satisfied being in the holy place. And Jesus has opened that curtain which divides the holy place and the most holy, the holy of holies. And the Lord wants you to walk into the Holy of Holies, into the inner court, like a bond slave, carrying a cup. And Paul said, I pour out my life as a drink offering. And it gives me the picture of Paul walking into the inner court. And in his hands is a cup, the cupbearer of Christ. In his hands is a cup. In that cup is his own life. In that cup, his own life. He says, I pour myself out as a drink offering to the very Shekinah of the presence, to the inner chamber. Not under the balcony, not in the court, but to the inner chamber where there is only you and the king. There is nobody else. There is a heart-to-heart conversation. There is that ultimate level of intimacy where you see the face of the king everyday basis, and the king sees your face. Before you open your mouth, before your desire even form in your heart, the king asks you, what happened? What can I do for you? What is the problem we need to solve today? And I want to pour out my heart to you, my son, my daughter. And that is the level of relationship to which we are being called. Not the outer court, not the holy place, but to the holy of holies.